Hey, welcome back. We're in Maya now. I've brought in all of the scalps that we generated in ZBrush. So if I bring my outliner over, you can see we've got Hero 1 scalp, Hero 2 scalp, beard, brow, eyelid, peach fuzz. So these are all ready to go for generating the hair for the character. You could also do hairs in the nose and the ears. As I was saying earlier when we were looking at the reference, on the back of the neck and the shoulders would be pretty cool. So I might do them for the final character, but just for this process I thought that might be overkill doing so many. So yeah, we'll start with the hair scalp. Make sure, I like to keep everything named and clean in a group and all that. Make sure you have deleted history. I've got a hotkey here, but if you go edit, delete by type history, and also freeze the transforms on all that geometry, just so it's all nice and clean and we don't have any lingering transforms or anything like that happening. And I'm going to hide all the scalps apart from the one that I'm going to do first, which is the Hero 1 scalp. So okay, so to start off, we just select it and then we go to the XGen panel here, and then we can go create new description. That should give you this dialog box here, and we're going to call this description hair underscore, we'll call it head 01, and then that'll do. This is going to create a new collection because we don't have a collection yet. As we create all our other descriptions, they'll all be based under the one collection, which is kind of handy. Then all this we want to control using splines. It's the easiest way I've found. Groomable's it's a bit tricky to get like a solid look. I feel like you have less control over it. We want them randomly across the surface, and we want to place and shape the guides. So we don't want to use attributes and expressions. We want to place and shape the guides. I find it's just it gives you the most control. Well, without having to write expressions and things like that, it gives you the most amount of control. So this is all good to go. I'm gonna hit create, and it's just giving me all these little dots on every face, and it's given me a collection over here in my outliner. And yeah, this is ready to go. So what I tend to do is I'll hide the head geo just so I can see exactly where my scalp is, and then I'm going to just start creating some curves. So this is where you add your curve guides. Now, something which took me a while to figure out, but the first time I started creating my guides, I would like put one here, and then one here, and one here, and one here, and one here, and like I thought these were quite well spaced out, and I didn't think this was too many and going overboard. But in the end, what happened is once I covered the whole thing, even though you might think you have more control by having more of these guides, you actually end up having less control. You end up having to control small areas, and the hair becomes more difficult to control and give you the look that you're looking for. Another thing is if you put a curve right on the edge here, you're going to have what I found through my learning how to do this, I found that I'd get a really dense edge along the hair here, and it wouldn't be nice and organic and broken up. So I found doing this method didn't really help me out. So I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to start again. I'll start from the middle actually. So I'm going to place my first one here, and now I want to create as fewer guides as I need to, but enough that I have control over the whole surface. So it takes a bit of getting used to, and it'll take a bit of trial and error to get the right amount. But yeah, it's just, if you look at how spaced out I have it, I think that's a pretty good representation. So I'm putting my first one there, I'll put one at the bottom here, and then I might put another 2 in between these two. So I might put one here and one here. And so that's all I need down the center of the head. They're the 4 curves that I'm going to be using. So next I'll come over here and I'll put one I think about here. Another one about here. Actually, I might try do 2 over here. So maybe one here and one here. That might be too close actually. Let me undo that. I'll do another one here in the middle, and then the next one I'll do one here and one here. And so I'll do the same on the other side. Doesn't need to be exact, but just a general idea. So one here, and then one here, and one here. Okay. So that's good. Now I just got to fill out these areas in between. So I might have one here and here. And down the bottom I'll have one here and here. Do the same on this side, here and here. And then up the top, here and here. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. By the way, you are actually able to mirror across the x-axis. Even though this scalp is pretty symmetrical, it's not symmetrical enough and it ends up stuffing up. If you are using a symmetrical mesh, feel free to just create one half and get that looking the way you want it to, and then mirror it over, and that'll save you a bit of time. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So I'm going to create another one here, and another one here, and another one here. And then same on this side, one here, and one here, and one here. And that's it. That's all I'm going to create for the scalp. I can add more if I'm like, oh, I got a bit of a bald spot here or something like that. But this should be pretty solid from my experience. Okay, so now I can select all these guides I've just created, and I'll go under primitives, and the first thing I'm going to do is rebuild. So this will rebuild how many CVs are along each one of these curves. By default it's 5. For shorter hairs like the eyebrows, I found that to be solid, but for the hair where I'm going to want it a bit longer and give it a bit more finesse, I found 10 was a better option. So I'll give them all 10, and then I'll select them again, and I'm going to set a length, because these are pretty short to begin with. I am going to be scaling the curves separately to get like the specific lengths, the length variation where I want it, but as a good starting point, 5 might, yeah, I think 5 is going to be pretty good. So that'll just give you a good starting point. By the way, yours, this may depend on scale. I haven't tried this on another model. I've primarily just been practicing on this guy, but you may find that if you're dealing with a much smaller character, like if you look at my grid here, if your mesh is a lot smaller than mine, because this is meant to be the size of a giant, which is 10 times, his head is 10 times bigger than a human's head. So these curves may end up being 10 times bigger than you will have in your scene, but just giving them this general amount of length and a rebuild of that many curves should be pretty solid. So now what we can do is we can have a look at what this looks like. So by hitting this just generates what the look, and so this is just showing all the curves splaying out along that the direction of our guide curves, and this is what I would expect to see really. Another thing that we want to do is we want to go to preview and output, and we want to set spline segments to 1. This will, like if we have heaps of hair, this makes it slightly cheaper in our viewport, so it'll be a little bit less slow. But in the primitives, we want to increase our CV count to something quite high, like 25. And once we start running noises and things through the hair, if you don't have this set very high, you're not really going to get all that fidelity in the noise which will be running through the hair. So setting that to 25, and then the width I like to set to 0.05 for now. But when it comes to render time, I'll have them even thinner than this, even down to like 0.02. But I just find visually 0.05 at this point looks better, just to really see what's going on here. You have this button as well. This is multi-sample anti-aliasing. So if you turn that off, you can see the hairs are looking a bit crunchy. But if you turn it on, they look a lot more smooth. And so once again, when we start running noises and things through this, it'll actually become more apparent the difference between these two. Right now, because they're just straight, it's hard to see like that's making much of a difference, but trust me, it is. Okay, so I'm gonna move my outliner onto my secondary monitor, and then I'm gonna hit Q to remove my placing curve tool. And then we're going to go to utilities over here. Oh, one more thing. So under primitives, you've got taper and taper start. So because at the moment the hairs aren't actually tapering to a point like they naturally would. So as you increase this, you can see they start tapering. Now I don't want to go all the way up to 1, but I watched a tutorial, and the guy doing the tutorial said he primarily sets both of these to 0.8 to get like a decent look. And yeah, I agree. I tried a number of things, but 0.8 and 0.8 seems pretty solid. So I use that for nearly all my hairs. The only time I wouldn't do this is possibly on the beard. If a beard has been shaven, normally they won't come to a point anymore because they've been cut by a razor blade. So if you look at people's beard hair on a microscopic level, you'll see that they don't actually really come to a point anymore. They're all cut off. So for a beard, not adding a taper can give it a different effect. Now you can see that when I was zoomed in here, the hair was generated where the camera could see it, but nowhere else. I don't really like it when it does this, so you can go to preview output and untick only primitives in the view, and then it'll go everywhere again, which is what I want. Okay, so now we can start designing this hair. So by clicking this button, we can turn off the visualization of what the hairs are doing. So we can only just focus on the guides. And then I'm going to go over to utilities. And the only utility I've really bothered using here is guides as curves. And basically all you need to do is you click a curve, you click modify as curve, and then you can move it around. Now we have a little bit of a problem here. Normally when I do this, you can see all the vertices along here. Yeah, there we go. There they are. I'm not sure why they were hidden, but anyway. So going back to the reference that we were looking at in the earlier chapter, if we're looking at the hair, I'm basically just looking at the directionality of how his hair is falling and flowing across his scalp. And I'm just going to try and mimic this because what the guide curves do is they just give you a very general direction and flow to the hair, which is great because it means you don't have to fiddle around with heaps of curves to get the look that you're going for. So then you hit accept when you're happy with how the curve looks, and then you go on to the next one. Now there's lock length here. So if you untick this and then go modify as curve, you can actually affect the length, and I would suggest you use soft selection by hitting B on the keyboard. That'll turn it on and off. And then if you hold down B and then middle mouse click and drag, that'll change your radius. And then you can like stretch these out. But I'm not a big fan of this workflow. I prefer to actually just scale them in just this way, so it's a global scale. But we'll get to that in a bit. So I normally keep lock length ticked at all times, and I'll go modify curve again. I'm going to turn off my soft selection, and then once again just like give this curve a general rotation and flow and position. These can be changed at any time, so I'm just trying to get as quickly as possible. I'm just trying to get it into a position where I've got something work with, something to start looking at really. But I'll definitely be coming back and tweaking these later on. So just keeping in mind what the reference looked like, and even having the reference on your other screen is a good way to go, so you can see like how the flow needs to be. And with so few curves, you may think like, oh, that's not much control. So you can add more curves if you want to. I just found that having fewer curves will give you a more natural look, and it'll be much easier to like address problems and issues. So I'm gonna have this one coming in here, and you can see I'm just changing the camera angle to like change how I'm looking at the curve. So bring it down, change the camera angle, give it a bit of a swirl, bring it in closer to the scalp. Alright, next one, modify, move. And I like to do this part quite quickly and just get it out of the way, because it's kind of difficult to know what the hair is actually going to do until you start running a few modifiers and parameters to give you the look of the hair that you're going for. I also want some variation. I wouldn't want all these going like in the exact same direction, otherwise it's not gonna look very natural. So this one's going this way and this one's going this way. So this one, I might have it flicking off to the other direction. So I'll pull it up again. This takes a little bit of getting used to, but you'll get the hang of it. Okay, that'll do. And this might be a bit too intense, but we'll see once I start generating everything. And pull this down, give it a little flick. Oh, modifies curve, bring it down. So yeah, as I said, just trying to get this part out of the way as quickly as possible. If you are going to use symmetry, I would do this process first before running symmetry. So like I'd have half of this all groomed and then run the symmetry, so I'm not having to groom all these ones as well, but I don't have that liberty, so yeah, I'm just gonna do each one by one. If you want to fast forward through the tutorial, feel free. I'm just doing the same thing basically on each one, so it's not that exciting at this point. Yeah, just hop around the surface, get a feel for it. Now, if you were doing a haircut which was more like stylized with a nice part in it, placing these curves would be very important, because if I wanted a part like, I don't know, down this part of the head, not that there would be one in this area, in this region of the scalp, but I would then have my curves, I'd have these ones on purpose going in this direction, and I'd have these ones going in this direction. These may even need to be a bit closer together to really define where that part in the hair is. But so yeah, you got to keep things in mind like that when you're doing this part of the process, because these will be controlling the overall low frequency direction of your hair. I'll do this one next. So now I want these ones to be hugging into their head, into the front a bit more. Because in the reference they were like kind of, they were going like from here, they were going down and out, and then as they got further in, I guess they were going more. Oh, just had a hiccup there. Yeah, they were going more like back, I guess. So sometimes I'll refresh the curve by coming to this view and then like just drag it in. Now this one. This one. Now I'm gonna warn you, once I'm done with this and I click back on this visualizing button so we can see what the hair's actually doing, it's gonna look pretty crap. It's gonna look pretty rubbish. And it's kind of disheartening because you're like, oh, I just did all this work moving all these points into place, and like, it's kind of like, oh, it's looking like crap. Like, so, but the thing is, once we start running the modifiers and things on the hairs, that's what'll give it the natural look that you're going for. All right. So I've adjusted all of the curves now. So yeah, let's run the visualization, and you can see they're all just kind of laying across the surface here. Nothing really that interesting. So first of all, I want to give some length variation to this. So the ones in the middle, I want to have the longest, and then these ones not as long, and these ones once again a bit less again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these, all the ones that I want to lengthen, and then I'm going to hit R and then scale them, and then I'm going to deselect this one and this one and this one and this one, and then I'm going to scale a little bit further. And this is purely just to give variation. So deselect all those ones. Oh, not this one. And then more length. And then this one, this one, and this one, and then more length again. So now you can see these ones are quite long. Now you can also see the thickness of these. Now I don't think the thickness is a big deal at all, but if you want to refresh how they look visually, you can go back to primitives, rebuild, set to 10, hit OK, and it'll set them all back to the same thickness. I don't think that changes anything, that's just personal preference. So now that they're longer, I might click on some of these. Well, first of all, let's refresh, and you can see we got a lot more volume in this region now where we've made them longer. But let's remove them for a second, and we'll just reposition some of these. So now with the more length, you have more of an ability to really design these curves. So now by doing that, just get some more flow variation happening here, directional variation, and make them hug back to the surface a bit more. Just little updates and adjustments here. And maybe I've scaled them too much now. Maybe they'll need to be adjusted again, but that's not a big deal. Maybe these ones will need to be bigger because there's quite a contrast in size happening, but it doesn't matter. You can always come back and re-update and adjust, which you'll most definitely need to do once you start adding the modifiers and things like that to the surface. So yeah, just getting some interesting shapes and flows happening. Alrighty, maybe pull this one in a bit. Okay, so right now I'm just looking at how far they're sitting off the surface. To me, this looks okay for now. So let's have a look. And yeah, it looks all very flat, uninteresting, not much variation going on. We do have nice variation here on the edge. And so as I was saying earlier, if you do place all your curves really tight on the edge here, they'll all sit on the edge and all terminate there, and it doesn't look very natural at all. But by putting them further inside the scalp, you get this really nice organic breakup of density along the edge of the scalp here, which is a lot more realistic. Okay, so now that I'm happy with their placement and we've got a bit of scale variation on the curves, we can start looking into the modifiers. And now this is like the workhorse of XGen. This is what makes it stand out to me. I was really impressed by this. So first of all, we want to create clumping. And we're going to want to do 3 passes of clumping. A low frequency, a mid frequency, and a high frequency. So I'll add this clump first. And then we got to set up maps, because you see nothing happened, but that's because we got to set up maps. So we click on this. And now for the first one, that's going to be our low frequency. And I want to generate that based on the guides. You can generate it off this density slider here, and it'll give you all these little yellow lines. And these all show a clump. So we would be clumping on all of these, which is far too many. Like I'm not going to be creating a clump at a density of 1. So I'm going to start off by just doing the guides. So we'll have 1 clump per guide, and then I'm going to hit save. And that's going to clump all of my guides that I've manually placed together. And now this obviously looks unrealistic and terrible, but we have a clumping scale here. The R stands for root and the T stands for tip. And now what you can do is you can grab this tip and you can see how it opens up. And I found setting this on the low frequency to about 0.3 was pretty good. And now we'll come back and readjust this after we create the other clumps, but this is just to kick it off with the low frequency. So now I'm going to create another one, clumping. Now this is clumping 2, so I'm going to go set up maps, and I'm going to set this density to 0.01, and we'll see what that looks like. So I'll hit generate. And now I want a density which isn't as intense as isn't as low frequency as the guides, but it's a bit higher. So I don't think this is quite enough. So let's try 0.05 and go generate. And so this is looking a bit better for mid frequency. So just to check, we'll hit save. And now that'll clump all of those. And yeah, it looks pretty good for a mid frequency. It may be a little too high frequency, but we can always come back and change this. So once again, I'm going to grab the tip. Oops, make sure you don't create another one and you're actually grabbing the tip. And then I'm going to set this one to 0.2. And so already you can see we're getting some sort of like form variation happening here. There's a lot of like bald spots and bald patches, but we'll fix them up in a bit. So let's create another clump. So this is going to be our high frequency. So we'll go set up maps, and then we'll set this one to 0.1 and generate. And so you can see this one's pretty high frequency in comparison to the other ones. Hit save. And you can see once again we're getting high frequency on top of that. And then I'll set this clumping to 0.1. And there you go. So we're now getting these nice clumps. But yeah, as I was saying just before, we're getting a lot of regions of bald spots and stuff like that. So before I go ahead and fix that, I'm just going to add one more, which is cut. Now this one is fantastic for adding variation so that the clumps, because at the moment all the hairs in every clump are the same length. What this does is it'll add variation to all those clumps so they're not as thick out at the end. And you can adjust this, like the more split hairs, the more cut you have, the more like split hairs you'll have. So some of them are becoming really super short and others are still quite long as they were originally. This is a bit too much, I feel, so I'll go back to 5. I thought 5 was pretty good. Okay, now we can go back to clump 1, and leaving this at 0.3, you can see the value I set to 0.3 on the low frequency. So on the low frequency it's 0.3, on the mid frequency it's 0.2, and on the high frequency it's 0.1. So the smaller the clumps, the tighter they'll be getting, which through my experience that's what I've found has given like a pretty good look. But now what we need to do is we need to fill it out a bit more, and to do that I just tend to create another one here and then drag that around, and I'm not really looking at where it is on the graph, I'm just visually looking at how it's looking here and how broad and if I can cover up these regions. At the same time I'm getting these really wacky like pulls in these hairs, which isn't really what I'm looking for, but I'll just play around with this to try and get something that I like, because I want to fill it out, but at the same time keep a lot of this clumping that's going on. I might increase the density just so I have a better understanding of what's happening. So 5 might be too much. Let's try 2. What did 1 look like? So maybe 2.5. I reckon we'll go to 2. Alright, so back to the modifiers, and I'll keep adjusting this. And now I'll go to clumping 2 and do the same thing. And you can see we're starting to fill it out a bit, but we still have some nice clumps. These ones are looking quite odd. That might be due to the guides, but I'll have to check that out in a bit. And then we'll go to clumping 3. And so this is going to be giving us some natural looking clumps, but at the same time, and like some really nice variation while using a small number of guides. So to me this is looking kind of odd. I haven't actually seen it do this before, but I'm going to go back to the curves and keep adjusting them to see if I can kind of pull this back out so it's not looking so crushed in. So go back to utilities. I'm going to select this one to begin with and go modifiers curve. And now I'm just going to kick this one out and hit accept and then refresh just to see what happens. And this isn't really what I'm going for. Let's just try pull it straight out. So there's obviously something happening in the clumping which is incorrect. So yeah, you can see here, right? The higher I go, the more it kind of goes wacky. So I really want to avoid it. I still want to get a lot of distance, but I want to avoid it going really broad like that. So maybe what we'll have to do is bring this up to 0.4 and just see if that helps us out. Alright, looking at it as a whole, I think that's helped a bit. Like looking at these ones now look a lot better. So now I'm going to go back to utilities and I'm going to put this back to how it was before. Refresh. And now that's looking a bit better. I think we could add a bit more length to these ones here. So I'll select these 3, make them a bit longer, select the middle one, make it a bit longer, and then I'll modify it once again, just pulling it back in, and then refresh. You can see we just added a little bit of length there. So this is looking, it's not looking too bad, considering we haven't even added a noise to it yet. It's looking pretty good. Okay, now here I'm going to try a little bit more density, so I'm going to go 2.5. And then, actually let me go back to modifiers. I don't think, oh yeah, I adjusted this one. I'm just going to play around with these a bit more to see if I can help the look of it a bit more through the clumping. I just want to make sure that it's still filling out enough. It's a really fine balance between making it look too clumpy and unrealistic, but also not filling it out too much that we kind of lose the look that we're going for, like the natural look. I think by increasing the high frequency, reducing the clumping from the high frequency is helping a fair bit. So maybe we can bring it back in on the mid frequency a bit. There we go. That's giving a pretty nice result. So yeah, you can see how the hair's kind of, we can see the flow in the hair here. And the specula's really helping to show that. Alrighty, now if we, under modifiers, if we now add a new one, and it's going to be a noise this time. Now, something that I found with this noise is, like, there isn't much hair that I've seen which has this sort of frequency of noise through it. Unless it's like someone's got super frizzy hair. So I find this to be quite unrealistic. As I was saying earlier, under primitives, if you have this set to the default of 5, you can see we lose so much information here. So by setting it to 25 or even 50, we get a lot more information in our hairs and what they're doing. So first things first, I'm going to want to set my frequency to something like 0.1 instead. So now if we turn this off and on again, you can see the difference it's making, which isn't huge. But now if we increase our magnitude to something like 5, now this is adding some really nice variations. So you can see with that off, we're getting a lot of very straight lines here. And with it on, with a low frequency, it's getting much more natural, a bit of a messy look. So if you're going for a much cleaner look, you might not want to have as much noise as I have here. Like maybe you'd want a magnitude of 2.5 instead, where it's a bit more of an in-between of not too clean but not too frizzy. And you can even go as crazy as like 10, and then that'll give you really nice frizzy hair. But as you can see on these smaller ones, it's getting a little bit out of control. So let's set it back to 5. 5 being a pretty solid look in my opinion. By the way, like what I'd normally do, and I just forgot all about it, is I'd bring back the head, and then I can hide the scalp. And you can continue working like this. It's better because you can actually see how the hair's looking on the character itself. So yeah, feel free to do that at any moment that you feel comfortable with. Okay, so oh, by the way, if you want to hide the groom, like the grooming splines, you just hit this button here, and that'll hide them, so you can just visualize the hair on its own. And part of me is thinking about making this a bit denser. So the density is at 2.5. If we set it to 5, that'll add more density. But yeah, you can see like how natural the look is becoming just with so few like guide curves and all that. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this is coming along. I might want to adjust the length in some regions. But another thing we want to do is stray hairs flying off the surface of the scalp or the surface of the hair, because if you look at reference, you can see we have like ones like this and this and this, which are kind of like just strays, and these little ones here. So a really easy way, which I picked up from one of the tutorials I watched while learning XGen, is to go to modifiers. We'll create another noise. Once again, we'll set the frequency quite low, something like 0.1 again. I might even sometimes go 0.05, but 0.1 will be fine for now. And then we want to increase the magnitude a lot, so like 10, maybe even 20. And then what we want to do, see how this is creating some nice stray hairs? Well, we don't want it occurring all over the surface. So to reduce where they're appearing, what we can do is under mask here, we can hit this drop down, go to load expression, samples, XGen, and then we'll go down to water related expressions, noise, and smooth step. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of these will do a very similar thing to what I'm applying here, but this was the noise that the guy in the other tutorial used, and I just found it did the job just fine. So use this one, and now you can see already it made a difference. If we click on this, you can visualize what the noise is doing. So I know that I want to create a pretty high contrast, and I also want to reduce how many are visible, and also the frequency I want to change a bit. Actually, we'll leave it quite high. And so if you could imagine, everywhere there's a white dot, that's where the stray hairs are going to spring from, and wherever it's black, the stray hairs are not going to be visible. So I'll hit accept, and you'll see that It's not as crazy as before, but this is still too intense. But you can see how we're getting these really nice stray hairs flying off the surface. And the best way to reduce the amount is just to click on this low slider and drag it down until there's as many as you want. So you may want lots, you may want only a few, but this is a really good way to control how many you're generating. So bring it down a bit more. Up, sorry. Reducing them. Now, I think they may need a bit more frequency, so I'm going to try this at 0.2. And you can see they all changed, but I think this is looking a bit more natural. There's still too many though, so I'm just going to pull down on this slider a bit more. There we go. So you don't want too many, it's kind of a subtle thing. Like you just have some hanging off, like here. Sometimes I don't like their placement, like I don't really like the placement of that one. And so what you can do is you can adjust the frequency, and then the frequency will adjust how many are visible. I mean, like where they're coming through. And so that's pretty good. I might bring back a few more, just a little. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that's giving us some nice stray hairs. Not a fan of this one. Let's see what happens if I set the frequency to 0.5. Now they're getting a bit more of a curl to them now. Maybe the magnitude's too high, so let's go to 15. Let's try 10. Okay, that's looking pretty good actually. We've just got a few nice little stray ones. As I was saying, I want it to be not too apparent. It's just to help mess the hair up a bit. And this isn't only on like characters with messy hair. Like if I go back to my reference here, and I go back to my faces, and then we go to like, let's say, anyone, this guy. Like this guy, his hairdo's meant to be quite messy, but anyone with dry hair, if their hair's wet, you won't get this effect. But like, you're always gonna have like these little fine ones which are just hanging off the surface. Oops. Oh, lost it. Yeah, so I guess, I hope you get the idea. But if you just look at reference, like this guy, like he's got heaps. Like look at all these strays. Who else? Let me find another good example. Basically anyone whose hair isn't like really groomed. Like his hair's pretty wet, but you can still see we've got some really small clumps. But yeah, you get the idea. In some of these photos you can't really see it unless they've got a black background anyway. Yeah, here we go. So you got strays hanging out. Anyway, so that's it for the first tutorial. I'm still gonna, in the next tutorial, I'm still gonna like play around with this, play around with the guide curves and try get a better look. But this is how you get the base, a solid base for your hair happening. So yeah, I hope you guys could follow along, and yeah, I hope you got something out of it.